Well, hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or if it's the middle of the night because you're an insomniac, shame on you. I don't know how you say good middle of the night. I'm excited to break through pathways and where we're going with this because in the following through in the chapters in the training of the 12, we're at, I don't know what chapter it is there, but this is our 10th. And we actually get out of the box and out there into the field. You know, early on, Jesus promised, as recorded for us in the Gospels, that if you'd follow him to the original fishermen, that he'd make them fish for people. Well, finally, this chapter, we are moving on to when they actually do fish for people. It seems to me that when A.B. Bruce wrote his book, The Training of the 12, there were perhaps 20 to 30,000 missionaries globally. And missions were just starting to catch on, started in the late 1700s. And quite a number of younger people typically got on the boat and went to lands far away. One of my favorite stories is the story of Adoniram Judson and Luther Rice, who were going on separate ships to India, couldn't stay in India, went to Burma, which is now Myanmar, and they got their funding cut off because they changed their theological position. Luther Rice went back home to North America to say, you stay there, and I'll raise the money. And he traveled around just horse and buggy from town to town to churches of like mine. And out of that came the triennial convention of every 3 years. They'd get together for a convention. And out of that convention came the Association of Baptists, which came to be known as the Southern Baptist Convention. He got it started. They shunted him aside at the end of his life. And Judson didn't have a great time throughout his life, through all the trials. But he was part of the foundation in the 1812-ish years from there on to make a difference in international missions. We are needing a new wave of international missions, except national, here in North America, in Canada, and in the United States. The situation is that the attendance of churches in the Southern Baptists, and so as goes the Southern Baptists, so typically do all evangelical Protestants go in the U.S. They hit a peak and they're tailing off. Still proud to be the biggest and the best, and you can evaluate whether that's true or not, but they're tailing off. And what we need is a regeneration of people who rise up from their early years in childhood, in teenage years, to be exposed to the possibilities of doing great things both here and in other countries around the world, sacrificing their lives, going forward, maybe not seeing much in their own lifetime, but having it multiply out after them. We need a whole new raising up of workers for the harvest field, both here and around the world. Now, what A.B. Bruce was talking about was more localized, I think, was his perspective. I'm not sure about that, but I think it was more localized to his situation, and I think he missed some of the things in the passages that he's going to deal with today. So I'm going to get to some of those points that I think he missed. I may be wrong. I've been wrong more than once in my life, but I want you to consider, first of all, what he said, and then I'll throw in my own 2 cents worth. As if we had 2 cents, but in our world today, we didn't have any pennies here in Canada. We got rid of them. Okay, so the first mission effort where Jesus set them out for evangelism began, is recorded in Matthew chapter 10. The first 15 verses are really about the mission, but then he gives them warnings for the rest of the chapter. That's the following thing there. Mark's gospel doesn't say a whole lot about it, but it's the same story. And then Luke has 2 incidents. The one in Luke 9 is this first mission of sending out 12, just 12. That's it. That's where the whole movement began. And it made quite a difference. We'll get to some of the details as we go. Jesus sent out the 12s, and they'd learned some things, not all the things that they were going to learn as they were going forward, but then they were sent out to go. Now, they were sent out to teach, and the healing that occurred there was miraculous because Jesus was kind of, I don't know what the correct word is, but working through them so that they were exhibiting Jesus' power when they were doing their mission work. And I think that that leaves us today with a sense that when we go, we have to do the things to heal mostly the psychological, but also physical and poverty things. And so we need to take an interest in that on a global basis. And it's our responsibility as Christians to do that. It's not any government's responsibility. It's our responsibility to go and do what we can, help where we can, when we can, so that we have a teaching and healing ministry. And why is that? Well, they were sheep without a shepherd. That's what Jesus observed. He wanted to care, first of all, for the house of Israel. And he said, the harvest is plentiful. It was plentiful then. It's plentiful today. The problem was with the workers. Now, in the 1800s, when Bruce was writing, it had grown to maybe 30,000, somewhere between 20 and 30,000 international missionaries. And then in the next century, in the 1900s, which is now long gone, it multiplied to hundreds of thousands over time, and less than hundreds of thousands at any given time, but where it became a thing for the church to send out missionaries. That doesn't happen just because people individually think of it. That happened because there was a distinct emphasis being placed in the churches to meet the sheep without the shepherd, to heal people, to care for them, and to recognize the harvest. So it appears, according to Bruce, and I don't disagree with this, although I haven't delved down enough to know if I 100% agree, he thinks that the healing was unlimited. They could do that anywhere, but the teaching was supposed to be restricted in some ways. And I do think that, I don't know if he restricted the teaching, but he focused the teaching for them. And that's very important for us to follow up on. Now, when he sent them out, the 12, they went around the towns and villages of Galilee. These were towns of maybe 1,000 people. They were not very big. And if they came into town and started to speak on the streets and the open places, then, the news would get around very quickly. But they were specifically told by Jesus that they were to avoid going to the Samaritans, not like he didn't care about the Samaritans, and avoid going to the Gentiles. Now, Bruce has some suggestions as to why, and I think these are reasonable. He says they first of all, they only had a limited understanding. Bear in mind, this is early on in their ministry, and Jesus has got lots to teach them yet. And it was a matter of creating some simplicity for them. The simplicity meant that the main focus was that people needed to turn around, recognize their sinners, and turn around, and that the kingdom of heaven was at hand. Kingdom of heaven was the phrase that Matthew records, and the other Gospels, Mark and the other guy, Luke, they use the term kingdom of God, not something that John puts the spotlight on. So the kingdom of heaven, and repent. And now when you think of the kingdom of heaven, you can think of all kinds of aspects of that there's a good life. It's to come. It's at hand. It's here. It's possible to have a better life because you follow Jesus, and they are just newbies following Jesus and telling that story. Now, maybe Jesus wanted to avoid having them get into creating false hopes, because as soon as you said kingdom, they were thinking kingdom here and now. Let's overthrow the Romans and kick them out, and wanted to avoid that discussion because they really weren't capable of handling that argument well, and no point in getting in an argument with people. And so I wanted to avoid political troubles. It's a reasonable counting of things in my mind. Now, when the 12 went out, they got some results. They reached many people. Many people heard the message. Luke tells us that it got so far as to Herod, the tetrarch, who was the ruler under Rome in that area, and it made him nervous. People were saying maybe it's some special prophetic thing that's going on here, and it was. But often their impact was shallow because it didn't stay, and it was short-lived. And down throughout history, we've had many short-lived bursts on the scene of Christian endeavors that are not built to be movements that hang on with longevity. Now, Jesus did a lot of, let's turn the thing off of there if I can get it. Yep. Jesus gave them, when they came back with success, Jesus gave them some warnings saying, hey, you guys, don't think you're so hot. to just rejoice that you have a place in heaven. And maybe even Judas performed some miracles. The 12 were sent out. They were sent out 2 by 2. Don't know exactly who went with Judas. And even though Judas's heart wasn't right, because Jesus' heart was right, it's highly likely that he performed some miracles. You might recall that in Matthew chapter 7, Matthew records that people are going to come to him at the end of time and say, hey, we cast out demons in your name. And he says, I never knew you. Not, I knew you once, but you walked away. But no, I never knew you. So the situation here is that we obviously have to balance enthusiasm and humility and rest afterwards and reflect. That's what Jesus did. Have the debriefing. Whenever we send people out, we need to have and they use the term member care. And pastors need member care. Anybody that focuses in heavily on ministry, whether it's in the homeland or abroad, they need to be cared for. And they need to balance the excitement for ministry with the long-term spiritual health issue. It's very easy to get dopamine running around in your brain and making you feel all excited about things. But we find out what you're really made of when the going gets tough. And that's when the tough get going. You've heard that. And it was true. It's true in any sense that you've got to fight through the discouraging and difficult times. It's so important that we have an understanding that what we're doing is not always going to feel pretty. Now, the disciples seem to be focusing here on this first Galilean ministry of kind of going far and wide, and Jesus seems to be concentrating on the smaller group. That's a point that Bruce makes, and I think it's valid. Jesus was starting a movement that was going to make a deep and lasting impression on the world and grow from that small group to impact the whole world. He knew what he was headed to. Now, there were 2 short-term missions here. One was once recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the second one where they sent 70 or 72, not sure about the number there because there's a textual variance. When he sent those out, 70 plus 12 or 72 plus 12, who are missionaries who are going out to spread the message. This is, I think, something that Bruce he doesn't talk about in this chapter. Maybe he does later in the book, and I can't remember what he talks about all throughout the book. But I think that it's very important for us to consider, even though those were short-term missions and they were time-limited and they were only to the house of Israel where the whole message was to go to the whole world, this idea comes up in Matthew and Luke, where we're looking for the person who perpetuates peace in the town, or the worthy person, as Matthew calls him, and work in that situation, work with that person in his house, stay in his place, don't move yourself around, drill down with that one person in the town. Now, part of that was the convenience of just the accommodation, staying in the one bed and breakfast. Where I think that the main thing was that these 2 disciples sitting there, kind of as we would say, chewing the fat with the homeowner, could tell them everything about Jesus. And because they knew that person was a key person going forward. When you find somebody who wants to move, you drill down, you spend time with them. You focus on the development that they have in their life. This is a very important thing for us to understand in this short-term mission, which is an example. It isn't instructive, it's descriptive, but I think we should pay attention to the principles here. You go with limited resources. In fact, Jesus said, limit your resources when you go, expecting something on the other end of responsiveness. Give of yourself, teach and heal wherever you go. And it was the healing that got people's attention, so they'd pay attention to the teaching. So if you do good in a community, whatever that good is, it may catch the attention of some people. And expect to get back from that community. The support came from the field. This is something that we have not focused on. And I'm not sure exactly how you work that through, but we've tended in North America to raise the money from home. Sometimes it's raised on a collective basis by a denomination. Sometimes it's raised by the individual missionary, but whichever it is, the money's raised here to send them over there, and they don't have to work or hope for donations over there because the donations come from home. That wasn't the way it was in these short-term situations. They were set out with limited resources, trusting in the Lord to take care of them and to find the resources in the mission field. It's just we should be thinking about. And Jesus is quite explicit, again, in these short-term situations, that if you can't find that responsive person, just get out of there, move on, be gone, and make sure that when you emphasize these kind of field tests that are going on, that you're growing. The field tests of this transformative power only happens when you put it into practice. You can't learn to swim in a classroom. You can learn about swimming, but you got to get in the pool. And that was true no matter what was going on here. So when we think about this whole business of this transformative experience, you might say, well, I want to be like Jesus. Well, he moved from the small situation to let it expand and grow. And many of the people that latched on at first fell away. We need to get used to the idea that there's going to be a tremendous amount of fallout. You know, you get one new family coming to your church and say, well, we got a new family. Yeah, well, we get two new families because one of the two is going to quit. Well, not mathematically, but conceptually. That you've got to have far more people who associate with your church than those who attend. One of the mistakes that church planters often make is saying, when we start our church, everybody's going to be totally dedicated. No, it wasn't true in Jesus' day. You think you're better than him? You're not. You're not. It's not going to be that way. You let them self-select into the level that they will be involved with, and you work with the big crowd. That's why we're building breakthrough pathways. Breakthrough pathways. It's on my shirt here, and it's on the screen. We're building it to start very low on the ladder with very ordinary people, preferably teenagers, but also young adults, middle adults, older adults, whoever wants to be part of it. The ones who want to join. And we'll have some interesting and exciting things to do. We have quests to do in these breakthrough pathways where we do with 3 people in triads, and those triads shake themselves up and rotate so you're never meeting with all the same 3 people together at once. And those triads go through a quest, just an hour-long meeting, and go 10 minutes at a time. We just introduce a subject, and then we stop them. That helps to build enthusiasm. It also makes it easier for the people who are less used to what's going on. And that's the way Jesus did. He started small, and then it grew to big. And that can be true in my ministry and yours as well. I would rather have big. I like big. But generally speaking, I've started with small. But some of the small things that I've done over the years have grown into very, very big situations. Some that are reaching thousands of people that I've never met and have never heard my name. And I love that because it is very important you build a multiplier factor into the system, which we talk about in the Breakthrough Pathways book that is soon to be released. Now, there are 3 questions that you need to ask. What am I supposed to do right now, today? And then once I do that, what will it lead to next? If it's short-ended, you see, sometimes people will do a great big event and they'll do a bouncy castles in the park and all sorts of things and gather 4,000 or 5,000 people and not capture their information where they will surrender that or volunteer that information to them. Don't keep in touch with the people. Well, they haven't answered the question, what next? They get all excited about the one event and hope that you can jump from the one right into the inner circle of the life of the church, and it seldom works that way. That's what's happened with large evangelistic crusades, even though they try to follow up. The people in local churches need to understand you got to follow up with everybody. And first of all, you have to know how to follow up. You got to get their name and their phone number and their email address and their physical address so that you can follow up. But when you follow up, a lot of them are just going to think, no, thanks, I'm going to fall away. Don't get discouraged. That's the way it was for them then. That's the way it is for us now. Just cast the net far and wide at first and then narrow in on the people who are ready to respond. That doesn't mean you throw anybody away and you keep giving them chances, but you don't worry about it when they fall away because that's inevitable. So you get to the next phase and then you've got to ultimately get to the what then? where will we go then? If we gather up this church and we get to meet here, where will we continue to meet? Will we actually break off and start daughter churches? The trend over the last 20 years has been to start satellites, because we could do that, because of the proliferation of the internet, media, and so on. Well, how does that work? Some of them are saying that's not working very well at making disciples. There's a detachment from the main thing. I think there's strong evidence to indicate that the smaller is a great way to start and to keep multiplying before you get huge so that you can reach more and more people. You got to answer that what then question. So it's so important that we get this right, that we change the situation in the world as we find it. We are in decline. I feel like I'm that watchman up on the wall screaming and hollering at people, and they go, "Oh, Carter, you're always just so animated on this stuff." I'm animated because I understand what's going on. And I'm hoping that you will take this information, that you will marinate in it yourself, and that you will pass it on to others, because it's so important that people get an understanding. That's what Bruce wanted to do back in 1871 when he published his book. And it's known as being the foundational disciple. I can't get my words going. That is, it's known as being the foundational disciple-making book that's out there. And that's why we're covering it and we're redoing it into modern language, because it just might be one of the pieces that help the church going forward. There's lots of evidence of people doing discipleship type things today, but I say they work on the sixth rung of the ladder. They ask ordinary people to sign in blood on the covenant and make sure that they're there all the time. I'm all for that, for people who will, but what if they won't? You got to start where they are, get them curious so that it builds up and the passion grows in their life going forward. Won't you get this on to somebody else? Just share this video. I'm not working from notes. I'm just working from those PowerPoint points. And I didn't write anything out because I can't do this every week. If I have to write out a complete script, I got lots of other things to do as well. But you can take this and you can improve upon it and you can pass it on. Pass it on to your pastor. If you're a pastor, pass it on to your elders or deacons or whoever you got in the church and discuss it with them. And you might be surprised that some will say, how can we get started on this? Breakthrough Pathways is going to be released very soon to the public. We're still testing with some small people, Richard Fleming and I, and we're going to make this thing the very best we possibly can. And we've got to fund it going forward. We've just been a small group of us here now. We've got to fund it going forward. There's lots of difficulties, but we want to be faithful to the end. And I think you do too. So see you next week.